I booked the Airbnb because I needed a quiet place to finish a project for work. I had been getting distracted at home, and the deadline was getting too close. The place was just outside Portland, an older two-story house that looked normal enough from the photos. The price was cheap for the area, which should have been my first warning, but I didn't think too deeply about it. I just needed a roof, Wi-Fi, and a solid 3 days of silence. When I arrived, the host, a man in his late 50s, didn't greet me. He left the key in a small lockbox by the door and said he was busy with errands. I didn't mind the lack of interaction. I was actually relieved. I liked being left alone. Inside, the house felt old but clean. The furniture looked like it had been there for years. Heavy wooden chairs, a couch that sagged a little in the middle, dusty decorations that didn't match. The smell was the kind that old houses always have. A mix of wood, something musty, and maybe a hint of chemicals that I couldn't identify. But nothing too strange. While walking down the hallway to the bedroom, I noticed a door on the left side that didn't match the rest. The paint on it was newer, a brighter white, and the handle looked like a recent replacement. What caught my attention the most, though, was the deadbolt. It was on the outside of the door, as if someone wanted to lock something or someone in. I assumed it was just an old basement that the host didn't want guests wandering into. Maybe he stored tools down there. Maybe it was dangerous. Old houses often have weird setups. I shut the door and moved on. The first night, I worked for hours at the dining table. By midnight, my eyes were burning, and I decided to call it. I brushed my teeth, walked past the basement door again, making sure it was shut tight, and went to bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No sound woke me. Felt more like someone had touched me or shaken the bed. My heart was pounding for no real reason. When I got up to get water, something made my chest tighten. The basement door was open. Not just cracked, not halfway, but fully open. The dark staircase below looked like a throat swallowing down into nothing. Cold air rolled up from it, much colder than the house. I stood there barefoot, staring into that darkness, convincing myself it was just a loose latch. Old houses do weird things. Maybe the frame was uneven. Maybe I hadn't shut it as tight as I thought. I closed it again, this time pushing it hard until it thudded into the frame. I slid the deadbolt into place with a loud metallic click. I went back to bed, but I slept terribly. Every creak of the old house made me jump. The second night, I was more on edge. I kept looking at the basement door even though I tried to focus on my laptop. When I went to bed, I checked the door twice. It was definitely locked. But at almost the same exact time as the night before, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a cold air draft on my face. Not normal for a closed room. Not normal for a house with no AC running. I walked into the hallway, my stomach tight, and felt the cold before I even reached the door. It was open again. The deadbolt was still sticking out, meaning the lock hadn't been broken or forced. It simply wasn't in the door frame anymore, like someone had gently pulled it out from the inside. I stood in front of the open doorway, frozen. That was when I heard it. Slow breathing coming from the bottom of the stairs. Deep, steady, calm breaths. Not the house. Not pipes. Not wind. Person. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I just listened. The breathing didn't get closer. It didn't change. It was like whoever was down there didn't care that I was standing right there. After about 10 seconds, my body finally reacted. I grabbed my keys from the table, my bag from the bedroom, and walked right out the front door without even shutting it. I didn't stop moving until I was inside my car with the doors locked and the engine running. I backed out of the driveway slowly at first, scared that a face would appear in one of the windows. When I reached the street, I sped up. About half a block away, I checked the rearview mirror. The host was standing in the driveway. He wasn't waving or shouting or running after me. He was just standing there, hands by his sides, watching my car leave. His face was blank, like he expected this moment, like he had been waiting for exactly when I would flee. I drove until I found a 24-hour gas station and parked under the bright lights. My hands were shaking. I didn't go back for the rest of my stuff. I didn't write the host. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I reported the situation to Airbnb. They told me they would investigate and temporarily take down the listing. A few hours later, when I checked again, the entire profile was gone. No house, no host, nothing. It was like it had never existed. I never heard from Airbnb again, and I never got a full explanation. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about the breathing I heard, how calm it was, how patient. I think about the unlocked door, the cold air, and the way the host stood in the driveway like he knew what was in his basement and didn't feel the need to hide it. The worst part is knowing that someone was down there. Someone who didn't rush up the stairs, didn't speak, didn't try to stop me. Someone who had probably been there long before I arrived. Someone who might still be living in some other basement, behind some other door with a new lock on the outside, waiting for the next person to rent the wrong house. I booked the place because it was cheap, quiet, and close enough to Portland for the work trip I had planned. I didn't care that it was old. I just needed somewhere I could lock myself in for 2 days and finish a project that was already late. The photos made it look simple. Wood floors, plain white walls, a small kitchen, a desk in the bedroom. Nothing special, but nothing concerning either. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. The house sat on a narrow road surrounded by tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The driveway was cracked and uneven, with weeds growing through the splits like they had been trying for years. The host wasn't there, but he had left the key under a faded blue planter by the door. Inside, the place smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning spray. The furniture was mismatched but clean, like pieces collected from different houses. I dropped my bags near the couch and walked through the hallway toward the bedroom. That was when I saw it. A door just past the bathroom, painted beige like the walls, easy to miss unless you looked directly at it. It was the deadbolt that caught my attention. A thick, heavy deadbolt on the outside of the door. I stared at it for a few seconds. It felt wrong, even though I tried convincing myself it was normal. Maybe the basement door wouldn't stay closed unless it was locked. Maybe the host just didn't want animals getting in. I didn't want to think too much about it, so I set my bag on the bed and forced myself to forget it. For the rest of the day, I worked. I sat at the small desk in the bedroom, typing until my back hurt. Every few hours, I would walk to the kitchen, stretch, make something to drink, then go back to staring at the screen. The house stayed silent except for the occasional creak, which I blamed on the wind or the old floorboards. I tried not to look toward the hallway whenever I walked past it, because even when I didn't mean to, my eyes always drifted to that basement door. Before going to bed that first night, I stopped in the hallway and pushed the basement door closed. It clicked softly, and I slid the deadbolt into place even though something about locking it made me uneasy. I brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and got into bed. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up with a jolt, like I had been pulled out of sleep by something I couldn't remember. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and I noticed the air felt colder. My chest tightened, and for a second I couldn't tell if I was dreaming. Then I glanced toward the hallway. The basement door was wide open. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't even move. I just lay there telling myself the bolt must have been old, or maybe I hadn't slid it fully, or maybe the frame was crooked. I stayed awake for an hour, listening to the house settle around me, before finally falling back asleep. The next morning, I checked the door again. Closed it, opened it, closed it again. The latch felt tight. The bolt didn't feel loose. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to come up with a reason that made sense. Nothing did, but I told myself to stop overthinking. I had too much work to do. That entire day, I couldn't focus. Every time the house made a small sound, I found myself lifting my head, listening. At one point, while I was heating leftover soup on the stove, I caught myself standing at the edge of the hallway staring at the basement door, like I expected it to move on its own. I shook my head, told myself I was being dramatic, and went back to work. Before bed that second night, I closed the door again. I made sure the bolt slid all the way. I pulled on the door handle twice to check. Stayed shut. I even paused in front of it for a long moment, wondering why I suddenly felt like I had made a mistake. The air around it felt colder, like the heat from the rest of the house stopped right before that spot. I pushed the thought out of my mind and went to the bedroom. I must have fallen asleep fast, because the next thing I remember is waking up again around 3 in the morning. This time it didn't feel like a natural wake-up. It felt like something dragged my awareness upward, like my body sensed something before my mind caught up. The hallway looked darker than it had the night before. I could barely make out the shape of the open door. For a second, I thought my vision was playing tricks on me. Then my ears picked up something faint and low coming from the basement stairwell. Breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. Not like an animal. Not like the house making noise. These were deep, steady breaths. Someone inhaling and exhaling in the darkness. Someone standing just out of view at the bottom of the stairs. My whole body froze. My hands went numb. Couldn't even swallow. I just stared at that open doorway, unable to understand how the bolt had been unlocked, how the door was open again, and who or what was breathing down there. I kept telling myself to move, to get my things, to leave, but I couldn't. I was afraid that if I climbed out of bed, whoever was down there would hear me. I stayed perfectly still, barely letting myself breathe at all. It felt like hours before the breathing finally stopped. I waited even longer after that, watching the darkness in case something moved. Eventually, when the sky outside started to lighten, I forced myself out of bed. My legs were shaking so badly I had to grab the doorframe as I stepped into the hallway. The basement door was still open. I didn't look inside. I didn't want to see anything. I grabbed my bags as fast as I could, shoved everything into my car, and backed out of the driveway without even checking my mirrors. When I reached the end of the road, I looked back once. The host was standing outside the house near the porch steps. He wasn't dressed like he had just come out to get something. He looked like he had been standing there for a long time, waiting. His posture was straight and he didn't move at all. He just watched my car roll away, his eyes following me until the trees blocked my view. I drove for almost an hour before I pulled over at a gas station. My hands were still trembling as I opened the Airbnb app. I went to my trips, tapped the listing, and tried to scroll down to the description. But the page suddenly refreshed, and a message popped up saying the listing no longer existed. The photos were gone. The house was gone. Everything was gone, like it had never been posted at all. That was when I finally understood what had bothered me the most. It wasn't the breathing. It wasn't the open door. It wasn't even the host standing outside watching me leave. It was the deadbolt. The deadbolt on the outside of the basement door wasn't meant to keep something out. It was meant to keep something in. And whatever had been down there that night, breathing in the dark, standing at the bottom of those stairs, was still there. Still locked inside that basement in a house that someone didn't want anyone to know existed anymore. I don't think the listing disappeared because of a glitch. I think it was removed on purpose, just like every other trace of that place will be removed sooner or later. I never reported it. I didn't want to explain anything. I just drove back home and tried to pretend I had never stayed there. But some nights, when I wake up at 3 in the morning for no reason, I can still hear that slow, heavy breathing in my head. The kind that doesn't belong to any house or animal. The kind that belongs to someone who was waiting for a door to open. I booked a small studio Airbnb for a concert weekend because it was cheaper than the hotels near the venue. I didn't think much of it. I just needed a place to sleep, shower, and finish some work during the day. The pictures looked clean and bright. Light-wood floors, white bedding, a tiny kitchen, a small desk by the window. It looked perfect, almost like something from a small furniture store display. When I arrived, everything matched the photos. The place smelled like lemon cleaner, the sheets were crisp, the towels were stacked neatly, and the lighting was warm. The studio felt cozy in a simple way, almost comforting after the long drive. I dropped my bags, walked around, checked the fridge, opened a couple drawers, and didn't see anything weird. It looked like a normal, small Airbnb in a quiet neighborhood. I was tired from the drive, so I just wanted to settle down, have something to eat, maybe watch something, and then sleep early. I had work to finish in the morning, and the concert was the day after. It felt good knowing I had a clean place all to myself. I even remember thinking that the host had done a nice job setting everything up. There was a fake plant on a little shelf, a small rug by the bathroom, a phone charger already plugged in next to the bed, and a little welcome binder by the kitchen sink. Nothing felt off. Not at first. It started with something so small I almost ignored it. When I lay down on the bed later that night, I noticed a tiny black on the wall above the headboard. It was small, like the size of a pen tip. At first, I thought it was a screw cover or maybe a tiny paint chip that someone had tried to cover. I stared at it for a few seconds but didn't think too deeply about it. I was tired, and my body just wanted to sleep, but something about it kept pulling at my attention. It wasn't the size. It was the shape. It looked too perfectly round, too clean, too black, no dust on it, no small scratches, just a perfect dot in a place where nothing else was on the wall. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't relax. After a few minutes of staring at the ceiling, I sat up again and looked at that dot. It was maybe 2 feet above the bed, right where someone's face would be when they slept. The more I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. I finally got up. I walked closer and leaned toward it. At first, it still looked like a simple dot, but when I tilted my head slightly, the dot seemed to have depth, like it wasn't flat. I moved even closer until my face was almost right against the wall, and that's when I saw it. A tiny lens, shining a little when the light hit it at a certain angle. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I stepped back and just stared at it. I felt this cold wave move over my whole body. I looked around the room in a slow circle, and suddenly nothing felt safe anymore. Every object looked suspicious. I checked the dot again, and the more I stared, the more certain I became. It wasn't a screw. It wasn't anything normal. It was a camera. A tiny spy camera drilled into the wall. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to disturb anything because I knew that if this was real, if someone had actually put cameras in here, I needed proof. I needed something to protect myself. So I took out my phone and recorded it. I held the phone close, zoomed in, walked around it, and made sure I got clear shots. My hands were shaking so badly that the video might have looked like it was filmed in an earthquake, but I kept recording until I knew I had enough. Then I started tearing the room apart. Slowly at first, then faster the more afraid I became. I moved the bed. I took off the vent covers. I stood on the chair and looked inside the lighting fixtures. My heart was pounding so hard that my ears rang. Every time I found something that looked strange, my panic rose even higher, and I found more. Inside the air vent above the main door, tucked behind the first metal slat, there was another tiny camera. It blended almost perfectly with the vent's shadows, and if I hadn't used the light on my phone, I would never have seen it. The next one was in the second vent near the kitchenette. Same size, same placement, aimed toward the bed and bathroom. When I discovered the smoke detector camera, my legs almost gave out. I had stood under it earlier without thinking. It hung directly above the center of the room, pointing toward everything. The lens was hidden behind a tiny mesh circle that looked like part of the detector. I kept recording everything one by one. I didn't say anything. I didn't make any sound. I didn't want to alert anyone if they were watching in real time. The last camera I found was the one that bothered me the most. It was inside the fake phone charger sitting by the bed. The charger didn't even work when I tried to plug my phone into it earlier. I thought it was just cheap or broken, but now it made sense. When I pulled it out of the wall and looked closely, the charging port wasn't even real. It was just a hole with a lens sitting behind it. By the time I was done, my whole body felt shaky. My hands were cold. My mouth felt dry. I kept looking at the door like someone might walk in any second. I knew I had to get out, but I also knew I couldn't let the host know I found anything. If they were the one watching, and at this point it was obvious, then they might react badly if they realized I discovered the cameras. Maybe they were watching the cameras right then. Maybe they had alerts. Maybe they monitored movement or sound. I had no idea who I was dealing with. So I recorded everything, put everything back exactly how it was, and cleaned up the best I could to make the room look untouched. Then I messaged the host, acting like nothing was wrong. I sent a normal, boring message so they wouldn't suspect I knew anything. I didn't pack loudly. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't turn on more lights. I moved slowly, quietly, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping animal. When I walked out the door, my heart felt like it was going to burst through my chest. I locked the door from the outside, walked calmly down the hallway, and only when I reached my car did I let myself breathe normally. I drove to the nearest hotel I could find, paid whatever they asked, and went straight to my room. Once I locked the hotel door, I finally let myself feel everything. My hands shook for almost 10 minutes straight. I kept replaying everything in my head. The dot on the wall, the cameras, the silent vent, the fake charger. The idea that someone had been watching or recording me made my skin crawl. When I finally calmed down enough, I called the police. I told them everything, showed the videos, gave them the address, gave them every detail I could think of. 2 days later, a detective called me back. The tone in his voice was heavy, almost tired. He told me that the owner had done the same thing to multiple guests. They found footage. They found equipment. They found evidence going back months, maybe longer. He said that if I hadn't noticed that first tiny lens, I would never have known anything was happening. Most guests never saw anything. Some stayed for weeks. Some stayed with partners. Some stayed with kids. And they never knew a thing. Hearing that made my stomach twist even worse than the moment I saw the first camera. I keep thinking about it even now. How close I came to just sleeping under that camera without ever knowing. How small that lens was. How easy it would have been to ignore it. How many people probably did. I stayed in that Airbnb for less than one night. But that night changed the way I look at every room I stay in now. Hotel, cabin, rental, even friends' guest rooms. I check vents. I check smoke detectors. I check wall dots and outlets and chargers. Sometimes I feel like I'm being paranoid, but I can't help it. Once you see something like that, once you know how easy it is to hide a camera, you can't unsee it. And I still think about one thing more than anything else. If that tiny black dot had been just a little higher or a little lower, or if I had been a little more tired, I never would have looked twice. I arrived at the Airbnb late at night, after a long day of hiking through the mountains. The sun had already set hours ago, and the winding mountain roads had left me tense and exhausted. When I finally reached the house, it sat alone on a small clearing, surrounded by dark, dense forest. The headlights of my car illuminated a driveway barely wide enough for one vehicle, lined with overgrown trees whose branches scratched against the roof. The house was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, rustic wood siding, and a small porch with a single light flickering overhead. It looked old but well-maintained, the kind of place that promised quiet solitude. I unlocked the door with the key provided, stepped inside, and immediately noticed how silent it was. The house smelled faintly of pine and cleaning products. The main floor had a living room with an old couch, a small kitchen, and a dining table. I set my backpack down and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension from the drive. After a few minutes of looking around, I decided to check the bedrooms upstairs. The staircase creaked under my weight. Upstairs, I noticed one door that was completely closed off. No light, no signs of use, just a plain wooden door. I assumed it was storage. Nothing unusual. Many mountain houses keep cleaning supplies or seasonal items locked away. I didn't think twice about it and went back to the room I would be staying in. I unpacked quickly, leaving my clothes and gear neatly on the bed. The room was small but comfortable. I closed the blinds, turned on a small lamp, and tried to settle in. Outside, the wind blew against the house, and the trees rattled in the darkness. The forest felt close, almost pressing against the windows. Despite the quiet, I was strangely aware of every small sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint draft through the window frames, the occasional creak of the wood under the weight of the house settling. By around 1 a.m., I was almost asleep when I heard it. Very clear, very heavy footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, moving across the wooden floor. My heart stopped. The upstairs was supposed to be empty. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear over the sound of my own pulse. The steps continued, one after another, slow and unmistakable. Whoever it was, they were walking across the room that had been completely closed off when I arrived. I couldn't think rationally. I debated whether it could be the host checking on the property, but I remembered the listing explicitly said the house was private and no one else would be staying. This wasn't the normal creaking of an old house. This was someone walking. I grabbed my flashlight from my backpack and slowly climbed the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would give me away. I approached the previously closed door. To my shock, it was now slightly open. The edge of the door had been pushed inward just enough to create a gap. My hand shook as I pushed it further, just enough to peek inside. The room was not empty. The bed sheets were messy, tossed around as if someone had been sleeping there recently. A window at the far end of the room was unlocked, the curtain fluttering slightly from the draft outside. Even more unsettling, there were fresh food wrappers under the bed, clearly not from a previous guest. They looked like they had been left very recently. Couldn't believe it. Someone had been living here, hiding in this room while guests were supposed to be alone in the house. The thought of someone moving around, possibly watching me, made my stomach turn. I backed out of the room slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. I didn't want to stay in the house another second. I ran down the stairs, grabbed my keys, and locked myself in my car. The heater was on full blast, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed. I sat there for what felt like hours, straining to see through the darkness at the house. The wind howled, and the trees swayed, casting long shadows against the cabin. Every small sound, a branch snapping, the creak of the porch, made me flinch. I didn't know who had been in that room or for how long. Had they been living there for days, weeks, or months? Had they watched me unpack, move around, and settle in? The idea was unbearable. I debated calling the police, but the thought of someone still being inside the house, hiding somewhere I couldn't see, made me hesitate. I couldn't risk alerting them. I decided the only safe option was to wait until daylight. I kept the car locked, doors bolted, and windows closed. I sat there, flashlight in hand, watching the house, listening for any movement. Occasionally, I thought I saw shadows in the upstairs windows, but it could have been tricks of the light or my imagination running wild. Every creak of the wood sent my pulse racing. When the first light of sunrise broke through the trees, I finally felt some relief. I waited until the sun was fully up before starting the car. I didn't look back as I drove away down the icy mountain roads. The house disappeared behind a bend, surrounded by the dense forest, looking quiet and unassuming. I didn't call the host. I didn't ask for a refund. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. The thought that someone had been hiding there, inside the house, completely unnoticed, was enough for me to leave immediately and never return. Later, I learned that some mountain Airbnb properties have hidden rooms or storage areas where squatters can sometimes hide. It was a sobering thought. The cabin that had promised solitude and peace had instead exposed me to a stranger's presence, someone willing to move around undetected while I was supposed to be alone. I've stayed in many Airbnbs since then, but I always check every room, every closet, every locked area. I make sure windows are secure and never assume a house is empty, even if the listing says so. That night in the mountains changed the way I travel, and I've never been so aware of how vulnerable a guest can be in someone else's home. The memory of that messy bed, the unlocked window, and the fresh food wrappers under the bed is still vivid. It's a constant reminder that not every place that looks safe really is, and sometimes the quietest, most secluded houses can hide the most dangerous surprises. I never stayed another night in that area, and I never spoke to the host again. I reported the listing to Airbnb, making sure they were aware of the situation, but the experience itself can't be undone. I learned the hard way that isolation in a remote house can be terrifying in ways that no review or listing can ever prepare you for. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, and I needed a place to get away for a few days. I had been working non-stop for weeks and just wanted some quiet. The listing was in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, in a small older house that had been converted for guests. The price was low, which seemed perfect. The pictures made it look clean, simple, nothing unusual. The description mentioned a locked storage closet, do not open, which I didn't think much of at the time. Lots of places have locked areas for cleaning supplies or personal storage. When I arrived, the street was narrow and lined with old trees. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The house itself was unassuming. Pale yellow paint, a small porch with a single chair, and 2 windows on the front. I parked, carried my bags inside, and was immediately aware of how still it was. The house smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and old wood. I unlocked the front door and stepped into a small living area with a couch, a coffee table, and a bookshelf filled with random books. The kitchen was tiny but functional, with a fridge, a stove, and some basic utensils. A hallway led to the bedroom and bathroom. Everything looked tidy, nothing out of place. The storage closet was in the corner of the living room. It was tall, plain, with a simple keyhole. A small sign on the door said, "Locked storage closet, do not open." I noticed it immediately, but I didn't think much of it. I figured it probably contained cleaning supplies, extra bedding, or the host's personal items. I unpacked my things, had a quick snack, and went to bed. The first night was uneventful. The neighborhood was quiet, and the only sounds were distant cars passing occasionally. I didn't hear anything from the closet, so I went to sleep without thinking about it. The second night was different. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a faint noise, a slow shuffling, like fabric brushing against wood. I lay still, trying to convince myself it was the house settling, or maybe the wind outside making the floorboards creak. But it continued for several minutes. It didn't sound like the normal groaning of an old house. It was more deliberate, like something was moving slowly inside the closet. I stayed frozen for a long time, listening until eventually the sound stopped, and I fell back asleep. By the third night, the noise had become almost unbearable. Every time I lay down, I could hear the same shuffling sound, faint but clear. It seemed to come from the closet, and it went on for hours. My curiosity, mixed with frustration, finally got the better of me. I told myself I was imagining things, and I needed to prove it. If the door was truly locked, then I would at least know I was safe. I got out of bed, walked over to the closet, and tried the handle. To my shock, it turned easily. The door opened with a quiet creak. My heart jumped, a mix of fear and disbelief. I shone my phone light inside. The closet was empty, except for a single folding chair facing the door. Nothing else was there, no boxes, no shelves, no clothing. But the floor caught my attention immediately. There were scuff marks in the dust, fresh enough that someone had moved the chair back and forth recently. My stomach turned. The marks were unmistakable, showing that someone had been sitting there, watching or waiting. I closed the door quickly, my hands shaking. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every noise, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the wind brushing against the window, made me tense. I imagined someone sitting in that chair, listening to every move I made, just out of sight. The thought made me feel trapped. I considered calling the host, but I couldn't think of how to explain what I saw without sounding insane. In the morning, I packed my things quickly. I didn't leave anything behind. I checked every corner, every drawer, every part of the house to make sure there was nothing else unusual, but the rest of the house was exactly as it had been when I arrived. Still, the image of the chair, the scuff marks, and the idea that someone could have been inside without me knowing haunted me. I left the Airbnb without a word. I didn't ask for a refund. I didn't leave a review. I just got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. The quiet neighborhood felt different in the daylight, normal, almost peaceful. But I couldn't shake the thought of what had happened in that closet. The more I thought about it later, the more disturbing it became. The host never mentioned the closet beyond the small warning. There was no note, no extra lock, no camera, nothing to suggest why it should stay closed. And yet, someone had clearly used it, moving the chair back and forth like they had been sitting there for a while. How often did this happen? Was the closet used by someone with access to the house, or had a stranger found a way in during my stay? The thought that I had been completely unaware while someone could have been in that same room made my stomach churn. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the host used it themselves during cleaning and left it unlocked by accident. Maybe a previous guest had left the chair in a weird position. But none of those explanations fit with the fresh scuff marks, which showed recent movement. The marks weren't old. They were deliberate, and the chair was facing the door, as if waiting. Even weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I stay in a new place, I check every closet, every corner, every small space. The experience changed the way I think about locked areas in rentals. What had started as a cheap, quiet getaway became something I would never forget, something that made me feel vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt before. I never went back, and I never spoke to the host. The idea that someone had been in that closet, quietly observing, was enough for me to leave immediately and never look back. The folding chair, the scuff marks, and the silent presence of whoever had been there were etched into my mind. It wasn't a story of ghosts or fantasy. It was real, terrifying because it was possible and because it could happen anywhere in a place that felt safe and ordinary. I learned a simple but important lesson. Warnings on a listing aren't always about keeping you safe from yourself. Sometimes they're about hiding something. And when you ignore them, you might realize too late that someone else has already been there, sitting quietly in a dark corner, watching. From that day on, I check every door, every lock, every corner of any place I stay. And I make sure I never underestimate the quiet, ordinary spaces in someone else's home. You never know what might be hiding in the shadows, or what might have been sitting in silence while you slept, listening. I booked the cabin because it was cheap and tucked far away from everything. I had been feeling burned out for weeks, and I wanted a place where I could just sit in silence and breathe. The Airbnb listing showed a small, simple wooden cabin deep in the woods. Nothing fancy, nothing modern, but clean enough. The reviews were short and vague, but no one said anything bad. The host's description said the cabin was old, well-kept, and perfect for quiet stays. That was all I needed. The drive there took longer than I expected. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to something closer to a hiking trail. My car shook the entire last half-mile. Trees crowded the edges of the road so tightly it felt like squeezing through a narrow hallway. When I finally reached the clearing and saw the cabin, the first thing I noticed was how silent everything felt. No distant cars, no voices, not even the hum of power lines. The air felt heavy, like nothing had moved through here in days. The cabin looked the same as the pictures. Small porch, one window facing a stretch of trees, weathered wooden walls. The door stuck a little when I pushed it open, like it hadn't been opened in a while, but the inside was clean. Not spotless, just basic. A small kitchen, a living room with an old couch, a bedroom barely big enough for the bed, and a tiny bathroom that smelled faintly of damp wood. Nothing strange, nothing that set off any alarms. I spent the first afternoon unpacking, then walking around the clearing to stretch my legs. I didn't go far because the woods around the cabin were dense and uneven, with roots sticking out every few steps. The sun set faster out there, hidden behind the thick tree line, and by early evening the whole area was almost black. With no city lights anywhere nearby, the darkness felt heavier, like it pushed against the windows. Inside, I tried to settle in. I heated a can of soup, scrolled on my phone even though the signal barely worked, then read for a while. The silence started to feel strange. I could hear every small sound, the wood creaking, the fridge clicking on and off, the wind brushing against the walls. When I finally turned off the lights and got in bed, the quiet almost felt like pressure against my ears. I must have dozed off because the first knock jolted me awake. It was a dull, low sound. Not a sharp knock, not like someone hitting the door. It was more like something bumping into wood. Slow, spaced out, and coming from under the floor. I stayed still for a long time, just listening. Came again, the same dull thud, like something hitting the underside of the floorboards. At first I told myself it was the cabin settling, maybe the old pipes, maybe animals. I didn't want to think too hard about it. I tried to sleep again, but the sound came back every few minutes, always from the same spot, somewhere under the living room. I stared at the ceiling until the sun finally came up. In the morning, the noise felt like a weird memory, something I could brush off now that it was light outside. I made coffee, opened a window to get some fresh air inside, and tried to convince myself the cabin was just old. Old places have old noises. I was about to head outside for a short walk when I dropped my keys. They slipped out of my hand and slid next to the living room wall, right beside a small gap between two floorboards. When I crouched down to grab them, I noticed the gap wasn't just a crack. It looked like one plank sat slightly higher than the others. I pressed down on it lightly. The plank moved. Not just a little, it tipped upward like a lid. My heart started pounding, but curiosity pushed harder than fear. I slid my fingers under the edge and lifted the plank. It came up smoothly, revealing a square cutout in the floor that I hadn't noticed at all during my first night. Under it was a hidden door, made of older wood, darker than the rest of the floor. There was a metal ring bolted into the top of it like a handle. I stared at it for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. The listing never mentioned a basement. The cabin blueprint the host had posted didn't show any lower level. I wasn't even sure why a place this small would need one. I lifted the door just enough to look inside. The hinges didn't squeak, which somehow made it feel even worse. If they didn't squeak, it meant they were used often enough to stay loose. A narrow wooden staircase led down into a dark space. Dust coated the steps, but not evenly. Near the top, where the dust was thickest, I saw them boot prints. Fresh ones, deep enough to be recent. They led from the bottom of the stairs up toward where I was standing. But there were no prints going the other direction. Someone had come up from the basement. No one had gone down. I felt a cold rush run through my whole body. My hands started shaking. I slowly closed the hidden door, then lowered the plank back into place. I stood up and backed away from that spot like it could open again on its own. The knocking from last night suddenly made sense. Maybe something had been hitting the underside of the floor because someone was down there. Someone walking around. Someone climbing those stairs. I kept trying to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe the host used it for storage. Maybe someone had checked something down there recently. Maybe the dust just didn't show footprints well on one side. But none of those excuses felt real. The plank had lifted too easily, the hinges looked too clean, and the footprints were too clear. And the worst part was knowing the person who left those prints had come up onto the main floor, into the cabin where I was sleeping. And there was no way to tell when it happened. I didn't waste time. I didn't even pack my things neatly. I grabbed everything I could reach, shoved it into my bag, and walked out fast. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The woods on the way to my car looked different now. They felt like they were hiding someone. I threw my bag in the back seat, got in, and locked the doors immediately. The cabin stood there in the clearing, quiet, harmless looking, like nothing had happened inside it. The porch creaked when the wind hit it, and that small sound made me feel sick. I didn't look back again. I drove out of there so fast I worried I'd blow a tire on that rough road. Branches scraped the sides of my car. Every shadow between the trees looked like someone watching me leave. When I finally reached the main road, I pulled over and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel while my hands shook. I didn't report anything. I didn't message the host. I didn't even ask for a refund. I didn't want any reason for the host to contact me again, or to ask questions, or to claim I misunderstood something. All I wanted was distance. The more I thought about it later, the worse it felt. Someone had been using that secret basement recently. Someone had come up into the cabin while it was supposed to be empty, and the host never mentioned it, not even once. The cabin wasn't cheap because it was old or because it was deep in the woods. It was cheap because someone else was using it too. Someone who didn't want to be seen coming or going. And the knocking I heard that first night wasn't pipes or animals. It was the sound of someone moving under my feet, in a space I didn't even know existed, climbing those steps toward a room where I slept with the door unlocked. I don't think I want to know who it was, and I don't think they expected me to find that door. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a break from everything. Work had been draining, my apartment was too loud, and I just needed a few days alone somewhere quiet. I picked a small studio Airbnb in a rural area about 2 hours outside my city. It wasn't completely isolated, but it sat on the edge of a long dirt road with fields on one side and a thin line of woods behind it. The listing said it used to be a storage building that the owners converted into a guest suite. The photos showed a clean bed, a small kitchen, and a long window facing the woods. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was already low, and everything had that orange glow that makes things look calm. The main house sat about 50 feet away from the studio. It looked old, but I didn't have to interact with anyone. The host had sent me a code for the door and told me to make myself at home. The studio looked simple but clean. White walls, wooden floor, a queen bed, a desk, and the window with a view of the woods. The place smelled a little like old paint mixed with lemon cleaner. There was a faint humming sound from the fridge, but nothing else. I walked around and checked everything the way I always do when I stay somewhere new. The bathroom was tiny, no window inside, and the fan above the shower made a rattling noise when I turned it on. I noticed the floor in front of the bathroom had a hollow feeling when I stepped on it, almost like the board underneath was loose. I didn't think much of it. Old buildings always have something off about them. I set my bags down and sat at the desk for a while, just trying to settle into the silence. The woods outside the window looked almost too still, like the trees were frozen in place. I could see a thin path cutting between the trees, but it looked barely used, maybe just a trail from the owners walking their dog or something. After I ate a small dinner, the sky was already dark. I didn't feel tired yet, so I sat on the bed scrolling through my phone. The place felt calm at first, but after a while, I noticed how thick the silence was. Even the fridge seemed quieter than earlier, the kind of silence where you start hearing your own heartbeat in your ears. Around 10 p.m., I finally lay down to sleep. I kept the small lamp on because the darkness inside the studio felt heavier than normal. I don't know why I felt that way, but from the moment I turned off the main lights, the air felt different, slightly colder, almost like the temperature dropped only inside that room. I tried to ignore it. I woke up around 1 a.m. because of a sound, a soft tapping. At first I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I lay still, listening, trying to separate what was in the room from what was outside. The tapping continued, slow, spaced out, almost like someone gently tapping the wall with a fingertip. I sat up slowly and looked around. The tapping stopped. I waited for almost a full minute. The silence came back so strong that it felt like someone was holding a pillow over the world. Then the tapping started again. It was coming from the direction of the window. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my head toward it and felt my stomach tighten. The inside of the window was completely dark. The woods outside were pitch black, so I couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection. The tapping didn't sound like it came from the glass, though. It sounded like it came from the wooden frame around it. I stayed completely still. The tapping went on for another few seconds, then stopped again. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the lamp on and tried to close my eyes, but every time the house settled or the fridge clicked, my body reacted like something was creeping closer. By the time the sun came up, my eyes were burning from how little I slept. In the morning, things looked normal again. The woods didn't look threatening anymore. The air felt lighter. I almost convinced myself that the tapping was just the wood cooling from temperature changes. I made coffee and tried to relax. When I went to the window again, I noticed something in the dirt right outside. A small patch of disturbed soil. Not footprints, not something obvious, just an area of dirt that looked like it had been scuffed or brushed aside. I told myself it could have been an animal, maybe a raccoon. It was a rural area after all. I brushed off the feeling and decided to explore the small trail behind the studio. It wasn't deep into the woods, just a narrow path. I walked maybe 30 feet before losing interest. The trail didn't open to anything special. I turned back toward the studio and noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the side wall near the bathroom area, the foundation had a small vent, maybe 4 inches tall. The metal cover on it looked old and slightly bent. I assumed it was some kind of crawl space vent. That explained the hollow-feeling floor, I told myself. Older places always have crawl spaces. Inside, the day was quiet. I worked on my laptop for a few hours. Everything seemed normal again. But around 4 p.m., I noticed something strange. My toothbrush, which I had left inside the bathroom cup, was now lying flat on the sink. At first I questioned if I did that myself. Maybe I knocked it over, but the angle it was lying at didn't look like it just fell. It looked placed. I picked it up slowly, staring at it for a long time. I checked the cup. It wasn't wet. It didn't look like it had been touched except for the toothbrush being moved. I put it back and stepped out of the bathroom. That uneasy feeling from the night before came rushing back. As the sun went down again, the silence returned. Even the woods outside felt unnaturally quiet. No rustling leaves, no birds, nothing. I tried watching something on my phone just to distract myself, but every shadow in the room caught my eye. I kept glancing toward the bathroom door, then at the vent outside the window, then at the floorboards. By 9 p.m., I felt so on edge that I decided to go to bed early and leave first thing in the morning. The idea of staying a second night made my skin crawl, but driving 2 hours through rural roads late at night didn't feel smart either. I hoped sleeping earlier would at least get me through the night faster. Didn't. Around midnight, I woke up again. This time because of a different sound. Not tapping, not settling wood. Breathing, not loud breathing. Soft, steady, slow. The kind of breathing someone does when they're trying not to be heard. My whole body froze. I didn't move anything except my eyes. The breathing sounded like it came from the direction of the bathroom. I wanted to think it was my own breathing echoing weirdly, but it wasn't my rhythm. My chest was rising fast. The breathing I heard was slow, too slow. I sat up. The sound stopped instantly. The entire room felt like it tightened around me. Every instinct inside me screamed to get up and leave. I reached for my backpack and shoved my things into it without caring how loud I was being. Before I walked out, something made me turn toward the bathroom one last time. The hollow floorboard in front of the bathroom looked a little different now, like it had shifted slightly or risen a fraction of an inch. I stared at it, trying to convince myself it had always looked like that. I knew it hadn't. I left the studio immediately. I didn't even look back. I jogged to my car, locked the doors the moment I got inside, and drove away faster than I should have on a dirt road. My chest felt tight the whole drive home, and I kept checking the back seat even though I locked the studio door behind me. I didn't sleep when I got home. My nerves were still shaking. The next afternoon, I looked up the listing to write a review about what happened. I didn't want to accuse anyone of anything crazy, but I wanted to warn others. Before I could write anything, I saw the listing had been taken down. No warning, no explanation. A week later, while thinking about the building again, I finally understood what made my stomach twist. The vent on the outside wall lined up exactly with the hollow spot on the floor inside the bathroom. Someone could fit through it. Not comfortably, not easily, but they could. Whoever it was had access to the crawl space, and if the scratches, the breathing, the moved toothbrush, and the tapping meant anything, it was clear they had been underneath me, behind the walls, or right next to me while I slept. I left that Airbnb before I ever found out who it was or what they wanted, and I'm glad I didn't stay long enough to learn anything more. Because the way the breathing stopped the second I sat up told me one thing. They weren't surprised I woke up. They were listening for it.